Hearing no objection, I'm going to call the meeting to order. All right. Hello, everybody. It's, I don't think you can see me. I'll work with that as we go along, but I can see most of you, and it's nice to see you. Hope you're all doing well. We have a couple of things to address today. This is our regular meeting, but let me start off with a discussion of where we are. And it's nice to see that Dr. Andrew Peterson is with us. We're going to ask him a little bit about some of the information he's gotten statistically from his studies of results of records of people who have been jailed and or who have been on pretrial release status. And I and Stephen and Dave Freeman and Dave Reynolds talked with Dr. Peterson informally last week just to get a sense of where his statistical analysis is. He's been reviewing the records of people who've been on pretrial services. That this is an ongoing process that Dr. Peterson will be doing because it helps us validate the pretrial risk assessment tool and helps us figure out which criteria are most indicative of success and which criteria less indicative of success. And of course, we also monitor as we go along to make sure that the impacts of the pretrial risk assessment and the impacts of our judicial officers' decisions on pretrial incarceration don't have a disproportionate impact on any particular racial or ethnic group, or any group for that matter. And I don't want to steal your thunder, Andrew, but let me just summarize by saying the results that Dr. Peterson's gotten so far, and of course they're preliminary, but they give us they give me, and I think others that talked with Dr. Peterson last week, some pause about the effectiveness of our current practices. Statistically, and I'll ask Andrew to give us more specifics, but the numbers are quite terrible. The numbers of people who have not succeeded on pretrial release it's a very high proportion. And we need to break those numbers down so that we can see the differences between people who didn't succeed because they didn't appear for a subsequent court appearance that was mandatory. And of course, the court's rules on that have changed quite a bit. And there are much fewer mandatory appearances now for defendants than there were when we started this process. We also need to break it down into those people who've been charged with new crimes. What are those crimes? Are they serious crimes, or are they less serious misdemeanor property kinds of crimes? So we've got all those statistics to bore through, but basically the majority of people who've been released on pretrial services have not succeeded for various reasons. And maybe I'll let you tell us a little more about that, Andrew, and then talk about the conclusions we might draw from that information. Can I turn it over to you to summarize the information we've gone through?
Dr. Peterson, could I interject a comment here?
Please, absolutely.
I want to welcome Adam Fryer and Damani Johnson, who are joining us as sort of adjuncts to our racial equity lens on the pretrial risk assessment work. And thank you for joining us. And I just want to underscore, maybe Andrew will report this independently in his comments, but even though the outcomes on failures to appear in new crimes are not encouraging, we don't see racial disparities showing up from the application of the risk assessment tool. If I'm recalling correctly from the results we talked about last week, Dr. Peterson, maybe you can say more about that as you go through your conclusions.
Thank you, Stephen. And I'm sorry, I meant to welcome all of you, but especially those of you who haven't met with us before. It's nice to see all of you, and thanks for being here. Go ahead, Andrew.
No problem, no problem. And feel free to steal all the thunder you want. I have no use for thunder. So yeah, that's, for those who don't know me, I'm Andrew Peterson. I'm a research principal with the Administrative Office of the Courts and the State Center for Court Research. I've been working now with Whatcom County for a few years, or pre-pandemic, I think we go back to, which is, it seems like a whole lifetime ago, when I used to drive up and we'd do this in person. But yeah, as Judge Garrett and Stephen mentioned, Alan has been sharing the data that they collect through CE Pretrial, folks that go on supervision, how long they go on supervision, if a risk assessment's been administered, where they kind of fell categorically in terms of risk level. I also have information from the jail. I collected from the jail directly, giving me when they came into the jail, when they were released, and reasons for release, things like that. Now, some of my work involves trying to connect those data sets together, and then also connecting that to what the AOC has, which is record of charges filed across the state. So even if they may have been committed an offense in Whatcom County, maybe they went down to Skagit and committed another offense. Whatcom wouldn't necessarily know that, but the AOC would be able to capture that and identify that. So I've been looking at trying to measure, during that time they were on supervision, and during the time of their case was pending, did they have an FTA warrant issued, or did they have some kind of new offense that occurred? And I think Judge Garrett and Stephen characterized it pretty correctly. So from what I've seen so far, when I'm not completely done with the analysis because they're still checking, I want to make sure that the data are reflecting what we think they mean, that it looks like the data are entered correctly, all those kinds of things that we can check as well as we could check them. But yes, it seems like the majority of people, maybe a slight majority of people on supervision are failing. That we're looking at, I look at that in the overall and then broken down by racial and ethnic category. And it seems like the rates are relatively consistent across racial and ethnic groups. And that's lower than the folks that are released from jail, either they post bail or bond, or they're released on their own recognizance, but are not on supervision. Now there could be a difference in the likelihood that folks, between those two groups, the likelihood that they would offend. So if you had a risk assessment for everybody in there, folks that are released but not put on pretrial supervision may be considered less risky, quote unquote, than the folks that are on pretrial supervision. So that's something to keep in mind. There may be significant differences there between those two groups, but those are the numbers we're seeing so far. So I hope to have that done before the next time we meet, certainly, so that we can share this information. You can see what I'm seeing and have some more confidence in it. Dave Graham, I see you.
Yeah, sorry. Do you have any exact numbers, or are you still kind of in this not mentioning them? I'm just kind of curious I kind of have an idea usually how many people are on pretrial, commit new felonies, and kind of have an idea of this, but I'm just curious if you got percentages or not.
Yeah, so right now I'm looking at about 350 people that have been on supervision. And there are a couple of things I noticed. One is that some folks will put on, they're kind of the period that they're indicated they're on supervision. It was actually very short. I don't know the exact reason they were removed from supervision. That was in the data file. And so if it was, if they were in there for only on supervision for a week or two, I'm not including them in this analysis because they're going to look like they were successful, but maybe there just wasn't time for them to fail. There were some folks that were on supervision or officially placed on supervision, but actually never got released from jail, either because they didn't bond out or whatever. I'm not including them in the analysis either because they're going to look like they succeeded. And so we've got about 350 out of there. Out of the 350, 135, which is about 40%, had either no new offense during that supervision time or no FTA warrant issued. So that's kind of the overall number I'm seeing. I'm also trying to look at that by kind of the length of their trial. So, if the time from their case filing to their adjudication was very short, those folks you'd suspect would be more likely to succeed because they just have less time, right, to not show up for a court hearing or commit a new offense. But we're looking at that as well, in addition to the across racial groups.
Perfect. Thank you. It's excellent.
Yeah.
So I think Andrew is fine-tuning the numbers. He's very careful about not getting too big picture about things. So I know he's trying to fine-tune the numbers, and we'll get them to us. And we'd hope to be able to do that in advance of today's meeting. And the raw numbers that Andrew's working with come from the jail and require some interpretation before they're just launched into a formula. So we'll be getting that information from Dr. Peterson. But I was talking, the general trend that we see is not good. We see way less success than we'd like to. And statistically, the chances of someone failing at their pretrial release are in almost direct proportion to the amount of time before trial, obviously. So, people whose case gets resolved within 6 months have a much higher success rate on pretrial than people whose case gets resolved in 24 months or more. And so, obviously that's something the court can do and is doing to get through the backlog and get cases moving as promptly as possible. We all want that. Judge Freeman can't be here today, but he talked with me about his conversations with the court's commissioners on these questions. And we see that the court's commissioners have not been using the pretrial risk assessment form all that frequently. And the reason is that the court's pretrial procedures have changed so that the defendant's criminal history is more easily available to the judicial officer who's doing first appearances than that has been in the past. And a big part of the PSA has been to get that information before the decision maker in an easily understandable form that can be looked at quickly while the officer is on the bench and figure out what the relevant information is. Some of that information is coming to our judicial officers anyway by the criminal history information. And they are using the PSA and would continue to use the PSA as a confirmation of their initial take on the kinds of pretrial conditions that should be imposed. One concern that they voice that I think is really true and something that our group is going to need to deal with is that because of the pandemic and because of changes in court rules and because of the current tsunami of mental illness that seems to be afflicting our society, especially in the criminal cases, what the kinds of cases in which people are being held in jail have changed hugely in the last several years. So people who are likely to likely to not commit really serious felony crimes are being released. Many more defendants are being released, and the defendants who are not being released, by and large, are they're charged with very serious crimes, and the circumstances are such that releasing them is really not an option in most cases. So the commissioners, what they're seeing is a jail that is at or close to capacity pretty much all the time, and some new rules that have them releasing people more frequently anyway. I think that's probably something that Stark and Dave can talk to more directly, because they're in the trenches in that situation. But what it comes down to for me, and I think for this group ultimately, is that the role of pretrial services needs to be updated to address our current realities. We set up pretrial services with the PSA before the pandemic, when incarceration of people who maybe could make it on their own with a little bit of help was happening. And that is happening less now. We also have an opportunity, as we look to we have an opportunity to restructure pretrial services and consider how we want to do that, and what kinds of services we think should be offered. So we've got some policy making decisions ahead of us in this group. Again, we make recommendations to the judges, and they're happy to have those recommendations. They remain the ultimate decision makers on the policies of the court, of course. So I don't know, Stephen, would you like to add anything to those comments?
I guess just two brief thoughts. Number one, that smaller group that Judge Garrett referred to approached Dr. Peterson because we realized we weren't confident that we were getting all the data that we had, or we were getting it in bits and pieces. And so I think there are some systemic questions on data gathering and data exchange that caused us to start the conversation. And so we're looking at ways to improve the raw material that Dr. Peterson is working through for us. The other thing is, in regard to the failure rates that Dr. Peterson reported, I think we realized that what we were getting was any new crime would show up as a failure, whereas our explicit policy choice early on in this pilot was to target new serious crime or new violent crimes. I think we articulated it both ways at different times. And so I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Peterson, I don't think we've yet parsed out whether the new crime was a fairly less serious crime and might not have met the standard we were targeting for the pretrial release criteria.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, and again, Andrew is fine. You don't have to call me doctor every time, really. I mean, I guess I appreciate it, but not really. Andrew is totally fine. You're correct, right? So the new offense. So Dave, those numbers I gave you, 135 out of 350. New offense includes misdemeanors in that. I will have the capacity to parse that out and say, which are misdemeanors, which are new felonies, which are new violent felonies, but I haven't had a chance to do it yet.
And do we have any, excuse me.
No, you go ahead, Carol.
I'm curious information about how this compares to what you're seeing in other jurisdictions. Like, is this normal for the time that we are in nationally, or is this specific to some of the extreme issues we have in this county with the status of the jail, or do we have any idea what's driving some?
That's a really good question. I don't know that I've seen other counties that have done like a longer analysis over the pandemic period. There have been some that looked at kind of the very beginning of the pandemic period, and then in terms of the risk assessments that are being, the PSA that's implemented in Thurston and Pierce counties, when they validated it, it was all on pre-pandemic data. So I would have to go back and talk to some pretrial folks in Thurston and Pierce, maybe, and some of the other counties, frankly, that have pretrial services, and see if they're tracking this information.
And I should point out too, and Stephen sort of alluded to this, the reason that Stephen and I and Dave met with Andrew informally was in preparation for today's meeting. We wanted to get the statistical information from Andrew so that we could share it with you at this meeting. We wanted to share it in a more, we wanted to share it by sending you spreadsheets that had the information in detail. But the information that Andrew got from the jail over all this time was not entirely consistent, and not entirely in a format where he could answer all the questions that we have. And so that's part of the reason that he doesn't have that information for us today, and we can tell you trends, but he's going to get it into more specific numbers. What is clear, I think, whether the numbers are fine-tuned or not, is that we need to reassess how we're going to do pretrial services in the future. And that taps into the article that hopefully we all got from Maya, talking about pretrial services and what they might look like in a voluntary way. Obviously, we can't force pretrial services like alcohol treatment or evaluations or those kinds of mandatory things. They can't be enforced on people who are presumed innocent until proven otherwise. So, but pretrial services can play an important role, I think, in terms of voluntary services. And now that John Krause, the former director of pretrial services, has left, we're looking, the court is looking at where pretrial services might fit into the court structure. And should it be more focused on human services and social services? And if so, would it be a good idea to make it an independent unit, independent of the court, or perhaps part of the family court system, or part of the system that includes drug court, which has, staff who are more social worker minded than law enforcement minded, if I can paint with a really broad brush. Those are the kinds of questions that I think the updated data is going to bring us to, not just because of the updated data, but because of the change in the situation and the fact that less serious crime, people charged with less serious crimes are being released at a much higher rate than they have been in the past, which is part of what we wanted, but be careful what you wanted or what you wish for. We've got very serious cases in the jail. Anyway, that's what I wanted to tell you. The reason that a few of us met with Dr. Peterson was not to preempt this meeting, but to prepare for it. I think we're going to get the more specific information from Dr. Peterson, Andrew, soon, so that we can have a much more informed discussion at our next meeting. I just didn't want you to think that part of us were meeting separately from the group. We were, but in order to lay the groundwork for the discussions that are going to be coming.
And I just got a couple of things to add to kind of maybe put the numbers kind of in perspective.
Sure.
Some folks weren't before. I know when we first started, I had Andrew run numbers way back when of taking a number of like how many people commit a felony when they're out on felonies. And I thought it was about 50%. I think it came in at like 46 or 47%. That was pre-pandemic. I would say now, and I don't know the exact number, but I mean, I do the 3 o'clocks every day. I also do all the arraignments. So I see every new case come in. I do all the charging. We're going to be about up to 60. And that's general. That's including everything. So the 60% doesn't shock me in as much as that's kind of what we're seeing across the board anyway, is that there's a pretty high chance if you're out in a felony, you're going to commit a new felony. I would say it's over 50% now. And second, I just want to back up what the commissioners are saying. We are seeing very, very few releasable individuals. Every once in a while, I'm surprised when we have like a possession of stolen vehicle or some property crime, and I'm like, how does this person even get booked? Because normally they're just booked and released, and you find out that either a bunch of warrants on another jurisdiction, or they had a bunch of, Bellingham warrants or something like that. But we're really seeing, serious individuals that just, there's just very few people who can be released. We're seeing it, and I wish our pretrial, and I don't know how we can set this up. I mean, it's the mental health situation. I mean, we're having individuals, we're doing so many competency orders now at first appearances for people who just can't even understand the process. They're refusing court. It takes about a week to get them in front of a court. And by then we're just entering a 1077 order. And then of course they're being held for Western and kind of on that. So hopefully as we change, maybe there's some mental health component. I know the crisis, I don't know the proper word, if it's center triage. I know we're starting to send people out there. But that's just, but I can back what the commissioners are saying. There's just very, very few sort of releasable individuals now.
One other point to note from our preliminary conversations is, and this is maybe, I think, the flip side of what Dave just reported, is that we're only able to measure people who are booked and have the PSA scored against them. But there are large numbers of people, because of booking restrictions, who aren't booked and therefore don't get scored. And we right now don't have a handle on their success rate. So it may be that if you lumped all of those people in who pre-pandemic would have been scored and released, that the success rate is actually higher than it shows on the current booked population. So we're trying to sort that out, and I don't know that we've thought of a good way to see if we can get any handle on who those people are who didn't get processed because of booking restrictions. And Dave Graham, if you have any ideas on that, they'd be more than welcome.
So yeah, they would show up on the arraignment calendars as first appearance. The problem is they wouldn't be coded on the calendar whether they're summoned in or been released from jail. So that might be a coding issue. Maybe Superior Court somehow can help with, I don't know that. Or if I know there is paperwork generated by the jail when they do a book and release to the date. I know that gets sent to Superior Court, but I just don't know how Andrew would be able to grab that. I guess he could look at the bookings. I guess maybe from the jail, maybe they would have them booked and released. Would you have that information?
I mean, I asked for every booking and release, I guess I asked for everyone released since August 1st or August or September 1st, 2019. So in theory, they should be in there. And I kind of separated out. So I just focused on the folks that were, the reason for release was either they had posted bail or they were PR'd, so that it wasn't some issue of, serving a sentence kind of thing. So in theory, they should be in there. The issue I have, and Judge Garrett alluded to it, was that I found that only about 10%, maybe 20% or less of the jail bookings have the case number or cause number included. And if they have that, then I can match that up to AOC records, figure out who they are, look at, easily track what they've done since. If they don't have that, we're playing a bit of a guessing game, with name and date of birth.
Yeah, and that's because, there wouldn't be a case assigned yet. It'll only be an event number because we haven't filed it. So they've been arrested by law enforcement, taken to the jail. They're not booked, they're released, and then we charge it before the arraignment. So yeah, you wouldn't be able to track that. That's right. None of the numbers.
Yeah, it makes sense, but yeah, it's difficult. And as Stephen was saying, about the, or as I guess has been said by a few people, Dave included, that we're seeing higher risk people in the jail, and that's consistent because I'm also looking at success failure rates by risk assessment level for those that had a risk assessment done, and more than about 55-60% of those that had a risk assessment done came in high risk, and that's way more than you'd expect normally. So it kind of shows that, yeah, this is not your average population we're looking at.
Carol.
Question regarding mental health needs. Do we know, or is there any way that we can find out how many people in the jail or with pending felonies who are identified to have significant mental health needs also have significant substance use issues related to or potentially causing or concurrent with the mental health needs? I think this is a question for future discussions about pretrial services needs, but I'm curious if that information is available.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's available. I mean, we sometimes hear it on 3 o'clocks, from family members who show up. And just an aside, I mean, this is a totally typical case, as we have a mother whose daughter was out of control, took her to Skagit Hospital. Skagit kicked her out, so she brought her up here for DCR. Didn't qualify for DCR, so the hospital releases her.
Tell us what DCR is, Dave?
It's a mental health evaluation, whether to detain them under a danger to themselves or others.
Okay, thanks.
And so she then assaults the cab driver, so police call, and she assaults the officers and a nurse. So she comes before us, and the mom's just like, hey, I need help. I don't know where to go, where to go with this individual. And the judge is stuck with, well, I don't want to hold her, but I don't want to release her. And I think she was one we tried to set up, to the triage. But we see a lot of this, that, the family members are coming to us, to the court, to say, hey, I want some treatment. And the court's like, well, I can't really do that now. My choice is either to hold them in a jail, which I don't really know is going to help them. But if I release them, it just kind of does this circle. So I'm hoping that if we go this route, we can kind of play in some mental services where we can say, hey, yes, here's who you can go to, here's where the judge can send some individual or send a family there. But a long way of answering your question. I mean, we get anecdotal, people say, oh, and they've used meth too, or they use drugs, but we don't have a checklist, a reform that we track that with.
Dave, in that individual case, do you happen to know what the outcome was of her going to the crisis stabilization center?
Yeah, it was kind of unique. I don't know if she made it, but the jail then piped in because we were all at a loss. And I don't know if I think the commissioner asked the jailer, well, hey, could you transport her? If I PR her today, could you take care of transporting her there? And then whatever happens there happens. And the jail said they would do that, which I don't know.
That's good.
Yeah, and so that's what happened. I don't know if she stayed there. I know she hasn't been on our calendar the last 2 days. So
I'm sorry, Dave, where did they transport her to?
It's maybe Steve knows what it's called. There's a crisis.
Yeah, it's the crisis stabilization center, the Ann Deacon Center for Hope.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. That's good thinking. Yes. Carol, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think, again, this for future discussion about services needs, but in experience that I have witnessed recently with family members, with young adults in similar situations, or a domestic violence situation with some similar behavior, I've seen repeatedly that the mental health doors seem to close pretty quickly when the assessment is that the underlying issue is fundamentally a substance-related issue. And the kinds of alternatives for medical care, for hospitalization, which is usually what I'm hearing that families are desperately seeking, those alternatives really are not available for people experiencing crisis due to substance use. And so there is this piece of the system that really is not working well when the underlying problem has roots or is perceived to have roots as being a substance problem. And I just think we need some bigger discussions about that. And again, maybe not today, but and the methamphetamine that's out there right now is clearly having huge impacts on mental health stability. And so I think on a national level, as well as on our community level, this is an emergency that we're facing, but our laws and structures and services are really divided between mental health on one side and substance on the other side. And those pathways are different, and the substance pathways are not giving people what they need right now.
Yeah, it's a challenging situation. And I think, I don't know how much farther we can go in this group without the numbers from Andrew, but we really do need to give some thought to how pretrial services can be meeting the needs of the defendants that we're seeing and the the people who work in the court system and try to expedite cases and keep the system going. Stephen, you want to add anything to that?
The only other thing I'd add, Judge Garrett, is, I think this has exposed a couple of questions, and they're really only at the level of very initial questions. The adequacy of the data that we talked about, Carol's point about the intersection with substance use disorder and access to treatment. The other one that I think came up and we weren't able to discuss it sometime down the road, I think it's worth this group discussing. The original VERA report recommendation was to adopt a validated pretrial risk assessment tool to use for pretrial releases instead of bail. And that's consistent with the criminal rule that calls for bail to be a last resort, only if necessary. And it turns out that most of the people even being released by the risk assessment tool and subject to pretrial services unit monitoring are also being assigned bail. Some of that apparently is a lack of confidence from the judicial officers in the level of monitoring that we're able to do under pandemic circumstances. So they're trying to add an extra layer of sort of incentive and a club for compliance. But the intersection between bail and PSA scoring release, it seems to me a question that we haven't really talked about in this work group, but probably we should, because I think we know from national research, at least, that bail also has racial inequities for low-income people and people of color. So it connects to some of our concerns at a couple of points.
Yeah, and I think I briefly addressed that last time. What the commissioners and judges are doing are lowering individuals' bail and putting them on pretrial service. I mean, that's the reason they're putting them on pretrial service, as a way of lowering their bail, whether it be economic issues or stuff like that. And I know before we found out the high success rate for people were when they have bail and some pretrial monitoring. Because to be honest, getting a phone call once a month, reminding you of a court date, which is
absolutely
3 months away, is it has to be another layer. It's not we just can't just release people from pretrial services and just say, here you go, especially the cases we see inside the jail. So I think the judges are doing a great job using it, because I bet you the majority, if we pull the numbers, and I don't know if Andrew's possible doing this, but on bail review motions, that's when most of the people are getting assigned pretrial services, because the judge is really looking for a reason to lower the bail and to say, hey, yeah, it's 50,000, you're held in assault second, you're held in this and that. I'm going to do this, but I'm also going to make you, do pretrial services. And so they're sort of looking at to sort of, as you say, layer it, to add it. If we take that away, we're going to have very, very few people on pretrial services. I mean,
well, I'm not jumping to that being the answer. I'm just, and I understand that, Dave. I think as long as we have such a thin toolkit, I'll say, for pretrial services, yeah, you got to look for something for those higher risk releases. But that wasn't our plan at the outset. It was to have some tiered pretrial services that intensified the monitoring for the kind of people you're talking about. So I don't know when we can get back to that or develop those. Maya has forwarded some research on just how effective electronic home monitoring really is. So more questions keep popping up than answers, I guess is what I would say.
And it's like the answers that we had aren't the answers anymore because the situation has changed so much. Yeah, but one thing that we can do and should do is adapt and change our approach. We have a good opportunity to give pretrial services to people who clearly need them. So it's a question of figuring out how, I think, rather than whether, and it will lead to better success. But we're not going to be able to do that this week because these are big questions. Let's talk, before we start losing people to other deadlines, let's talk about a meeting schedule for this coming calendar year. We have been meeting on the first Friday of the month in even numbered months. I kind of hate to put off our next meeting for 2 months. Andrew, how likely is it that you'll be able to get the refined numbers to us within the next, say, 2 weeks?
I think 2 weeks is about right. Yeah, that should be about the right deadline.
That could enable us then to have another meeting, say 4 weeks from today, to go over those numbers and begin the discussion about how we want to roll with the punches, change with the times. What do you all think about that? Specifically, what do you all think about having a meeting a month from today, 4 weeks from today, even though that's not our normal schedule? That's question number one. And question number two, do we want to stick in 2023 with the schedule we've had in 2022, which is first Friday of every month with the addition of March this year? Comments? Stephen, did I see a hand up in your box?
Yeah, I'm for meeting in 4 weeks. Maybe we can finalize a schedule for the year then.
Well, that's true. What do the rest of you think about that?
I mean, I don't have a problem meeting in 4 weeks. I like the every other month or every 3 months. I think every month would just be tough to do with,
I agree,
everything going on. But if there is an issue, like something like this, we want to get the final numbers in a month, I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to take us 60 days to get to a decision point, and it'd be good to move this along. I'll ask for anybody who doesn't want to meet 4 weeks from today at 12:30. Would you raise your hand or speak up? Hearing no response. Is that a time that all of us can make? Is there anybody who can't make a meeting that day and time? Mark, that would be what, March 3rd at 12:30. I see, is that your hand up, Damani? I see a little icon there.
Yeah, yes, it is. Did you hear me? Yeah, no, I'm just gonna be out of town that day, so but I'll be traveling, so. But okay. That doesn't mean that the meeting shouldn't take place.
I understand. Is there anybody else who has a conflict for that day? All right, Damani, we're gonna miss you. And we'll follow up with you after the meeting, and I'll send you an email. So you've got my email, so you can contact me, or if you prefer, Dave Freeman, with any input you'd like to give. But I think we will go ahead and schedule for March 3rd, because it's going to be virtually impossible to figure out another time with all the participants. Is that okay with you, Damani?
No, that's fine.
Yeah, okay. But we will be in touch so that we can get your input and let you know what happens at that meeting. All right, so.
Judge Garrett, could I add one question here?
Absolutely.
I want to loop back to your observation that those planning discussions included the possibility that pretrial services might bend more toward social services or human services connections, and tie that into something that came up in the past meeting. Dave Reynolds was saying, or maybe John Krause himself was saying, that a lot of the pretrial services folks were getting referred to the LEAD program. And as long as we have Adam sitting in with us, which I'm thankful for, I don't know the numbers, but Adam, would it be possible next month for you to sort of report on a kind of success rate for the pretrial services people you're managing? Because I suspect it's better than what we're getting with just text messages and monthly call-ins, and that hands-on approach might support the direction Judge Garrett was mentioning.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what hard data we'll have as far as like, appearing for court. We did have, we do notice a big success rate, and we just met with some of the public defenders for district court yesterday, and they were the conversation was super positive about the collaboration with LEAD and the success that they've had and trying to increase referrals as we expand. So I'll see what data we can grab that we have been tracking, and see if we can bring something to the table in March.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, good suggestion and good response. Thank you, Adam. All right. Do we have further subjects for discussion today?
Judge Garrett, Dave Reynolds and Dr. Peterson have their hands raised.
Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't see that. Okay. Dave Reynolds, speak up.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to, I know we were talking earlier about county new offenses and looking at only county serious offenses. I think we'd be mindful of the impact that any offense is having on the system today. And just, our public defenders are at capacity. It's really slowing down the system, and that's keeping these cases from resolving quicker. So I think it is important, no matter what the new offense is, that we continue to monitor that.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. Andrew?
Two things, actually. So first, I kind of related to this direction that pretrial services takes. Within the last couple of months, pretrial services officers from around the state have decided to kind of form a group where they meet regularly and just discuss issues that they're having, maybe have some kind of trainings, that kind of thing. And so I've put Alan in contact with those folks, and so he should be part of that now, and hopefully that can help, and that can aid in that process. And I was also going to say, Adam, if you need help with any of the numbers, let me know. Or if you have even like a roster, it could even be just names, because I have Alan had sent me the names. I could be go through and kind of tag people that had gone through LEAD. So you can get, if you don't have my email, I can get it to you or whatever. But,
that would be perfect. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so, yeah, so we can do that, and kind of, they can be kind of a sub analysis of the main thing. So that'd be good.
Okay. Anything else from anybody?
Judge Garrett, Jill here. I do have one quick thing. The Legal and Justice Systems Committee is hoping for an update from the group at its meeting on February 14th at 12:30 p.m. I'm hoping to get confirmation that someone here can attend that meeting and give an update on the work of the work group.
Okay. Is there anybody who's especially desirous of doing this, making this meeting on behalf of our group? I can do that. And I'm sure Stephen can do that too, but poor Stephen is going to so many meetings. Maybe it's my turn for that one. Shall I, any objection to my taking that on? I didn't think so. Okay, I'll be part of that meeting on behalf of our work group then, Jill.
Thank you, Judge Garrett.
Thank you for the reminder. Okay, Damani, I'll be in touch with you shortly by email and just to check in advance of our March 3rd meeting. Okay?
That sounds great.
All right. We have a plan, and I'll be looking forward to emailing with you, Damani, and to seeing the rest of you on March 3rd.
Judge Garrett, we do have a couple of attendees today, and a public comment section is scheduled for today's meeting. Can I go ahead and do that?
You bet.
Thank you. We have 2 attendees. If either of you would like to speak to the work group, please virtually raise your hand now. And we have 1 hand raised. Go ahead, Kristen.
Hi, it's Kristen Hanna. I just wanted to thank you all for being here at this meeting. I watched a few of the replays of them, and I was especially impressed with all of the information that was brought forth today. And yeah, that's all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Kristen. It's appreciated.
Judge Garrett, I also want to note that County Council Member Buchanan has joined us, and I particularly invited him through Jill because he expressed that the council is paying attention to pretrial and risk assessment kinds of issues and trying to get up to speed on what's going on in this work group. And I just wanted to ask if Barry has any thoughts or comments or reactions to share.
Just that I agree with everything that Christian just said, that this was a very valuable meeting. I look forward to attending these and just listening in. And one of the things that I'm working on is how we can demonstrate to the community that we've addressed the needs of the Bureau report that was put out in 2017. And of course, one of those recommendations was around pretrial and pretrial services. So we're looking how to frame that so we can, as you know, we have a big effort underway to build a new correctional facility and associated services with it. And so this is a big part of it as far as giving ourselves a kind of a look and a report card on how we've done since the Bureau report in 2017. So again, thanks all for allowing me to attend. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for being here. Thanks for your interest. It's appreciated. Anything further? All right. Well, once again, thanks to all of you. It was good to see and or talk with you all. And I'll look forward to continuing the conversation on March 3rd. And our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.